everyone, it's Leanne. Welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I want to do an experiment. So when I paint or when I do Copic illustrations, I like to add white into my drawings, especially with watercolor. Watercolor is really tricky to leave white on your paper, so it's always nice to cheat a little bit, make it a little bit easier. And typically I use a white gel pen to add white to my drawings. The problem with that is I find it's not as bright as I want it. I want a bright white. I don't want to have a bit of the paint showing through. I want something that's opaque. So I've gathered all the white mediums that I own, and there's quite a majority here, and so we're going to test them on some different coloring applications, coloring mediums, and see what works the best. So for an example, I'll show you on this one here, on this drawing, you can see that I've come in with my white Jelly Roll pen and I've added some white highlights. And so getting these are tricky. I find with the Jelly Roll pen, I'm just not satisfied. It takes a lot of work to get an opacity that's to my liking. So those are the kind of white highlights that I want to add to my art, and I just want to see what works best, and so I can use that going forward. So for today's test, I have a variety of mediums here to test. The first is acrylic from Winsor & Newton. This should give a good opacity, and acrylic does dry. Plastic, so it is one of those mediums that once you put it down, you got to make sure that it's exactly where you want it. It's hard to lift. It's not like watercolor. I also have some gouache. I had this in college and I've had this a long time. It's still very liquidy though, so I think it should be fine, but I'm going to test that out and see how it works. I have a Posca pen. I've recently started using these, and so I'm going to compare these on some different mediums and see if this is really good as everybody says it is. I have the Caran d'Ache Luminescence colored pencil. So this is really popular among artists. I found that a lot of people favor this because when you're coloring, especially a full colored pencil piece, this will give a solid white, especially if you lay it over other colors. It's really popular and it's known to work very well, so we'll give that a try. And to mix things up, I also have some Prismacolor whites, so the opposite of the Caran d'Ache, or the counterpart to that would be the Prismacolor white colored pencil. And then I also have a white Verithin, which should give me finer lines and greater detail. So we'll give that a try. And this is what I'm currently using are the Jelly Roll pens. I flip-flop between thinking one is better than the other, and then I think this one's better than this one. But they both act the same. I'm not satisfied with these. I feel like I can do better than these. But I do have Jelly Roll and the uni-ball Signo pen as well. And I just picked this up recently, and so this is Acryla Gouache. So this is a blend between gouache and acrylic, and it dries matte. So it dries like watercolor dries, which is matte, not shiny like acrylic, but it has the acrylic durability where once it's dry, you can't reactivate it like gouache. So I'm excited. Let's give these a try. So what we're going to do today is I have three types of cardstocks. I have Nina Solar White, we'll use Copics, and I have a mixed media for colored pencil, and I have some watercolor for watercolors. And we're going to try each of these on each of these. So let's get started.
One thing I do want to mention about this brush is it holds a lot of water. It holds a lot of pigment, but it is also very thirsty. And so it's very tricky to try to get a good distribution or equal amount of pigment to water ratio. And so with this brush and in putting this first layer down, I found that the watercolor was very saturated in water. It was more washed out than I wanted. And I also wanted a high concentration of watercolor pigment on the paper so I could get a very clear view of how the white mediums would work on top of the watercolor. So I did do a second coat because of it. You can see how thick this brush is. It is a beautiful brush. I really, really love this brush, but it is quite thirsty. So it will drop quite a bit of water down on the paper. And so this is the second coat after the first coat has dried, and I'm trying to do a higher concentration of pigment versus water just to get a darker layer.
overall, this is a really good view of everything. I'm disappointed in the acrylic. I felt that the binder was coming through a little bit too strong and not enough pigment. Could be the brand, could be that it is an older tube. It's not that old though, it shouldn't really behave that way. The colored pencils seem to have trouble working over the watercolor. I think that they might be picking up a little bit of the pigment there, or the medium. This Signo pen is such a disappointment. I have had it for a while, but it still has ink in it and it should work. My Jelly Roll pen would be about the same age as my Signo, and it worked okay. I was surprised it held up as good as it did, because it's not that great either, and I hate having to fiddle with the pens. I don't like the fact that the ballpoint on this is metal, so it will dig into the paper, and sometimes it skips because of that, because it's trying to grip, and instead it seems to be hit and miss when you write with it. So I thought this was a better pen than the Jelly Roll, but obviously it doesn't last as long, so I don't know. Maybe you've had different experiences, it's possible, but I'm just disappointed that I had to fiddle with it and I still didn't get anything. I think the winner with this one is the Posca and the Acryla Gouache. I'm shocked that this held up as good as it did. I feel like the Acryla Gouache, I might do 2 layers, because you can still see a bit of the brush strokes, I guess, because it's got thicks and thins. It's not an even coverage like the Posca pen is, but I feel like you could really get details with a brush with this, whereas the Posca pen, you're limited to the nib size or the way that the nib is controlled. So that's really nice. This, I find I have trouble on watercolor when I draw over colored shapes, but if I'm drawing straight lines, this looks really good. And as a quick kind of something to grab and draw a line with, this actually held up pretty good. I'm pretty impressed with it. What's your favorite? What would you use of the watercolors here? Let's try the next one. Let's move on to the mixed media over colored pencil. So colored pencil is a bit of a waxy surface. It will be interesting to see how some of these mediums hold up on this. So let's check out the first one. We have Jelly Roll up first. So here's a look at the final result over mixed media with colored pencil. This is using Prismacolor colored pencil. The Prismacolor Premiers is what I colored on this with. So with the jelly roll, the little circles held up good, but the line work just kind of got lost. It skipped over the wax, and I expected that. Signo is a wash. We know that that's not working. Unfortunately, it's not really giving us much result. Prismacolor acted more like a blender in this case because that pigment's already laid down and there's a solid coverage on this mixed media. So a lot of the grain or the tooth of this paper is laid down because of the medium already being applied to the paper. Putting the white over top was more like blending the colors that were already there. That's what I expected. It doesn't give me the highlight though that I would want with working with this challenge actually. So the Verithin is the same thing, just more tighter circles, or the line work seemed a little bit more crisp on the edges of the circles that I drew, but again, it acted as a blender. The Caran d'Ache does have a little bit more white coming through. It doesn't blend as much, maybe I would assume because the pencils are made up with different properties and the blend of those together, whereas with the Prismacolor, it's more of a creamy blend. They're all using the same structure, or coming from the same structure and blending together smoothly, whereas these are a little bit different of products, so they're probably behaving a little bit differently. There's a little bit more definition in the edge of the circle, and it looks a little bit brighter, but still acts more as a blender on top of this layer of colored pencil overall. So I'm not shocked at these results. The Posca pen was beautiful, and the one thing I want to point out with this, because the line work was so easy to create, the circles were so easy to create, and the color was a single even application of color. There's no lines or like I wouldn't have to go over it twice to make it opaque. It makes it easier to concentrate on the art when you have something that works this good. If you're looking for something that's a bright white and you want a solid white instead of having the colors show through, this is a beautiful option. I'm really happy with how quickly this laid down, how well it worked, and how opaque it is. The gouache, again, is something that worked, but I would have to do a couple coats because you can see the brush strokes. It's thicks and thins. It's not an even application. The line work is pretty light. If you didn't want a solid white highlight, maybe something like this would blend better with your artwork, but it's not something I'd probably use. The acrylic, again, I'm disappointed with the acrylic. It just seems like there's a lot of binder and not enough pigment holding up to give an opaque application. With acrylic, you would expect something opaque, but perhaps this acrylic, just because it's a mixing acrylic and it's not, I guess it says it's mixing white, it's not a white. That's too bad. It's just not really great for doing a hard white highlight. The acrylic gouache held up really good too. It does show brush strokes a little bit, so I would have to go over this again, but I'm really impressed with how this held up. So again, I guess my favorites out of this is definitely the Posca pen first, the acrylic gouache second. I do like that I could use a brush with this and get very tiny details if I needed to, and the jelly roll on the circles. Whereas on the watercolor, I really liked the jelly roll line work and the Posca as well, and the acrylic gouache. Here, I thought that the circles worked better over top of this waxy kind of colored pencil application, so that's really interesting. Last, let's check out the Copic markers over the Nina Solar White cardstock and see how everything holds up there. So here's a look at everything on top of the Copic markers on Neenah Solar White cardstock. Very impressed with the jelly roll. I love that it was very even, and I was able to get a quite opaque application of the circles, and the line work looks pretty good too. I thought that that just held up really nicely, and I would use this over Copics again. I think it worked a lot better than I expected. Signo, we know the pen isn't working. It's not great, so we'll pass on that one. Prismacolor was very creamy to draw, and I thought that this would be a nice highlight if you were looking for something that blended with your artwork and wasn't very stark. So if you wanted something that was lighter, but still echoed the color that's underneath it, this is a nice option. Verithin does the same thing as Prismacolor, but the problem with Verithin is it's a harder pencil, so it's good for doing details, but I find that it doesn't lay down as much pigment as the regular Prismacolor Premier. So this one's okay. So I had to press more firm to get the pigment to show up as bright, and not even as bright as the Prismacolor. The Verithin, it's good for details, but again, I would just use the Prismacolor over the Verithin. I don't find that there's a lot of definition difference between the Prismacolor and the Verithin. The Caran d'Ache was very creamy to use as well. I found that that laid down a brighter pigment, a more solid amount of white, and so it shows up a little bit stronger over the Copics than the Prismacolor does. But it is a negligible difference, and the Caran d'Ache is more of an expensive colored pencil, so if you are on a budget, I mean, it's a few dollars difference. The Prismacolor works equally fine, I feel. The Posca is beautiful. This is just a clear winner over every medium. It holds up, it's solid, it's opaque. You only need a single application to get a nice solid wash. The line works beautiful. You don't have to concentrate on applying the medium. You can actually focus on your art and the shapes that you're creating more so than the way the pigment's coming out of the applicator. So I just love the Posca. It's awesome. The gouache held up really nice too. It's actually very opaque. I didn't have to put too much down, or I didn't have to go over it very many times. You can't really see the brush strokes as much on this as you can on the other applications. I felt that the gouache held up pretty nicely. The line work is okay too. Again, I don't have the best brush for doing line work. I probably should be using a liner instead of a detailer brush. So the fact that at the beginning of the line, if it looks good, that's a good testament for line work for that medium. The acrylic, again, just, I don't know what's going on with this acrylic. This acrylic is not great. I'm going to try another one. We're going to do a test at the end here, and let's try one more different acrylic that is not a mixing white. Let's see how that holds up, just to give it one more chance. And the acrylic wash, again, is beautiful. The thing I'm finding as this is drying, if you can see, the white is kind of tinted to that pigment that's behind it. So in this case, the pink. I'm finding that the acrylic wash doesn't look bright white. It looks like it has a pink tinge to it. In an artwork piece, maybe this would be okay because it would be more married with the color palette and it wouldn't look like such a stark contrast. But for this test, we really do want bright white. We want like paper quality white showing through. I feel like in this one, the gouache is the winner. The Posca still looks nice and bright and solid, but it kind of looks like it's taking on some of that pigment as well underneath. It's coming through, and the gouache is holding up. It's solid. It's the most bright white. It seems to be holding up or holding its own in this case. So definitely the gouache is the winner for me in this. But let's do one more test with the acrylic. I'll be right back, and I'm going to grab another type of acrylic to try. So here's the last one we're going to try. We're going to give this just one shot. This is golden acrylic, and this is titanium white. This is actually from what I had in college. This has really been around a long time, but I have high hopes for this. I think we'll see an interesting contrast between this and the Winsor & Newton mixing white. So let's give this a shot and see what happens. Okay, so in contrast, this acrylic held up really nicely, and it is quite comparable to the acrylic gouache. It has more of an opaque application, and like I mentioned before, I've had this acrylic for many, many years, and it's straight out of the tube. We don't have to worry about the binder coming separate from the pigment. It came out really clean, and out of the tube, that's the first amount that I've taken out in probably a couple years out of this tube, and it came out perfect. And considering how old it is and everything, it's held up really nicely. The line work was a little bit dry, but all you need to do is just dip your brush in some water, and then I just like squeeze the ends of my brush to take the extra water off. And because my brush is a little bit more damp, the line will flow a little bit more cleaner. It did a little bit at the end here. Again, this isn't a good brush to do line work with. It's just a detailer brush, but you can see that it's quite opaque, and I think that looks really good over the watercolor. Would I pick it as a favorite? I think I would. I like that it is opaque, and you can see less of the brush strokes than you can in the Acryla Gouache, and it holds up really nicely. And again, the fact that I can use a brush to do the details with this paint gives me more flexibility than the Posca pen does, because I am only limited to the size of the tip of the Posca pen. So let's try the colored pencil next and see what happens there. Here's a look at the acrylic. You can see quite the contrast between the mixing white version and the golden version of the titanium white. It's nice and opaque again. It's very comparable to the Acryla Gouache. I almost feel like there's an equal amount of brush strokes in both. They're very comparable. This one, the Acryla Gouache, had a nicer line work or a smoother stroke, but the acrylic could potentially be a little bit more cumbersome because it's an older pigment that I have, whereas my Acryla Gouache is brand new, but it is comparable. And again, you can't judge too much with this brush. It's a detailer brush, not a line work brush or a liner brush. If you were to use a liner brush, it would look more like this. It would have a long bristle on it or long hairs, and then you can drag the line work more fluidly and evenly. It would give you a more even stroke. But I think that this looks really good. The opacity is really nice. I'm pretty impressed with this. So overall, I would put that in a top ranking. I think that the opacity is nice. It's easy to apply. I do love the Posca pen though in this case for the colored pencils. I just like how opaque it is and how I didn't have to concentrate on doing an even application of the pigment. It just went down nice and solid the first time. I didn't have to go over the circles or draw the line work twice. It looked really good the first time. The Acryla Gouache and the acrylic are comparable. I think they both hold up good. They'd be a fine runner-up as well, and the jelly roll for the circles or the shape details. Not the line work, it starts to skip over the wax, but this looks really good. So let's try the Copics last and over the Nina Solar White cardstock. I'm curious to see how well this works. I know it's going to work well, but I just want to see how well it's going to work. Here's a look at the acrylic from Golden over top of the Copic markers on Nina Solar White cardstock. I'm really impressed with how this laid down. It went down very smooth, and it has minimal brush strokes in there, so I don't think you'd need a second coat, or maybe a second coat at the most, to do a solid opaque application. I found the line work was really nice too, because this medium and this cardstock is very smooth. The medium glided over the Copics, and it gave a nice line, even though I've had trouble with this brush getting a nice even line with the acrylics. It seemed to work really nice and buttery on these Copics here. So I'm very impressed on how this looks. That is a combination of the Copics and the paper as well, that Nina Solar White cardstock. I see that it's starting to take on a little bit of the pink pigment as it dries, but it doesn't look too bad. It almost feels like the Acryla Gouache has taken on more of the pigment of the pink Copics than this acrylic is. It seems to be holding up pretty good. I would definitely pick this as a top option for doing white on Copics. I do love the Posca pen, but man, the gouache is the winner here. I still really feel like the gouache has held up really well. The acrylic is a nice option as well, maybe between those two. Really happy with the Jelly Roll pen overall as well. So for the Copics, I would definitely say gouache, the acrylic from Golden, and Jelly Roll pen. It's definitely a winner, and the Posca is obviously the most versatile over the three. So here's a look at the three results. You can see the white on each one. At the top we have Jelly Roll, and then the Signal, which didn't work. Then we have Prismacolor Premier, Verithin, Caran d'Ache, Posca, Gouache, Acrylic from Winsor & Newton, Acrylic from Golden, and finally the Acryla Gouache from Holbein. And so I think overall the most versatile option that you could ask for is a Posca pen. They seem to work on everything at some degree, mostly the best. In the Copics, not my favorite, but definitely a top choice. If you are strictly doing watercolor, the Acryla Gouache looks like a really nice option. It comes out very smooth and easy, and it holds up that solid white. Obviously the Posca is really nice with watercolor as well, and I would also consider the acrylic from Golden a really good option also. The thing with acrylic is when it dries like a plastic. It's hard. You can't re-wet it. You can't re-wet the acrylic gouache either, but because this is a blend between acrylic and gouache, the best thing about it is it dries with a matte finish like watercolor, so it blends in better with your artwork, whereas the acrylic is gonna dry with a shinier finish and it will stand out a little more if you're looking for something that blends with your medium. The Posca does have a bit of a sheen to it as well. So I think if you're looking for something with watercolor that's going to blend, acrylic gouache is the best option. It's going to give you that matte finish like watercolor. For mixed media, if you're looking for something just specifically for colored pencils on this paper, I do love the Posca pen. It's the clear winner here. I think that as a runner-up, we could definitely say the Acryla Gouache is really good for that. And then I'm really happy, again, with the Golden acrylic as well. This will have a shiny finish. This will have a matte finish. This will have more of a sheen to it as well. So again, it's just your preference. All three hold up. I find that this was the easiest to lay down on the wax finish, and you didn't have to consider your application of the pigment as much. You could just focus on the artwork because the pen gave me no trouble at all. So I really liked this. If you're strictly doing Copics and you're looking for a solution, in this case, I really love the gouache. This is the brand of gouache that I used. I really thought that this held up nicely. The thing I liked most about this on top of the Copics is it didn't pull that pigment from below. It kept its bright white. I found with even the Posca, the Acryla Gouache, and the acrylic, it was pulling a bit of that pink pigment up into the white, so it didn't look bright white. But this gouache really held up nicely and held its color. So if you're using Copics, I would definitely consider a gouache. I loved how this went down. I really like the jelly roll as well. For doing quick details, if you don't want to lug out some gouache, this was nice for doing the shapes. The line work looked really great too. I was really happy with how the jelly roll worked. The thing about gouache is if you do have it on your palette, you can reactivate it with water. It's like watercolor. So even if it dries, you can still reuse it. It's not like whatever's in your palette goes to waste. So there's a look at the three. Which medium do you use and which one would you pick as your favorite for that medium? This was a really fun test and I'm really happy that I got this done because I've had these white mediums floating around my art room for a while and I do use a variety of mediums to paint and color with, and I just wondered which one would end up being the favorite, and I was surprised by some of the results. So I hope you guys enjoyed this look at these tests. I had so much fun doing them. If you did, be sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe so you're notified the next time I post a video to my channel. Thanks so much for watching.